In the years after the war between the states, a devastated South struggled to make a new start in a ravaged landscape. Deep in Appalachia, the dire straits were sometimes alleviated by a trade in illegal liquor. Bootleggers dodged and battled with revenuers and other outsiders who came to enforce the law at the point of a gun. Some bootleggers became living legends. In the northern press, despised as criminals, and to many in the South, heroes. None so despised as the notorious outlaw, Major Lewis Redmond.
If that don't take a cake. Can you read that? Oh, the lovely Miss Gabrielle Austin and the Carolina outlaw Redmond. Now the Peckerwood that wrote this thing, he claims to be a minister too. Seems he has me saving this lovely young lady from being despoiled. Here, let me set the scene up for you. These dastardly villains drag the fiery-eyed, auburn-haired lovely into the town square where a Negro magistrate is ordered to tear off her blouse, exposing her maidenly flesh and peerless bosom to the lecherous stares of the town council. That's when I arrive. Straight away, I cold-cock the magistrate, sever Gabrielle's cruel bonds, and then whistle for my noble steed, my horse, you know. Then I swing into the saddle, lift the lissom lady on behind me, and amidst the cheers of the crowd, we ride away, off into the dark mountain fastness. Now, in case you're wondering what happened next, it might not be what you'd expect. It seems like after dining on wild mountain grouse and sipping a dark vintage from the vineyards of Picardy, after I'd quoted a few sonnets, I sent out a search party to find Gabrielle's fiancé. Well, I reunite the couple, give them some fatherly advice, then I ride away. I sure was disappointed to read I'm a man of principle. Evening, folks. I am Lewis Redmond, murderer, bootlegger, thief. At least those are charges against me. Now, I'd have to admit that I ain't got a lot in common with that perfumed, wavy-haired dandy in that story. He had some kind of aristocratic ancestry and was educated in England. Hell, I never even went to school, but I did learn to write and cipher a bit. French wine. John Barleycorn's the only vintage I knowed. But now, I can make you a jar of shine so pure that it makes grown men cry just to watch it bead. Of course, it's against the law, you know. Bootlegging, I mean. Well, in a little while, I guess, about 30 minutes, there'll be these two armed and dedicated representatives of the court. They'll come down that hall, through that door. There'll be armed guards in the hallway. They'll be in the courtroom too. and I'll be led away handcuffed, naturally. I'm a dangerous man. To face charges ranging from murder to assault and the armed rebellion to the theft of a federal agent's overcoat in Seneca, South Carolina. But we'll get to all that in due time. Now, this here watch, by which I am so greatly taken, was a gift from Miss Minerva Picklesmeyer of Savannah, Georgia. Minerva is the president of the South Carolina Women's Temperance League, and she is ever so eager to rehabilitate me. Well, I'm afraid not everybody feels the same way Minerva does. Take this wall-eyed little pipsqueak from the New York Times. Boy, he can get on his high horse. He starts talking about the lawless heathen that infests the mountain fastnesses. Short and long of it is, he thinks mountain folk are an inferior life form. And when he talks about us, he likes to use words like God-forsaken or dim-witted. He must have actually seen me once, because he talked about seeing me at the jail in Greenville. And sweet Jesus, I wished I'd known he was there, because he talks about the way I look. He said I had protruding eyes and was slack-jawed, and my features was untouched by the virtues of love and compassion. Never laughed or smiled. No, I leered or smirked. And when I walked, I moved around like something craven and sneaky. And upon seeing my features in repose at the courtroom, he said that he'd seen something demon-ridden and dark. Now let me see if I can't put that all together. Well, my wife, Adeline, she is at the trial too. He described her as a illiterate mountain woman with a vacant bovine stare. Now, according to my educated friend Hobie Ford, that means like a cow. My sister Alice was there too. Alice is crippled and she gets around on crutches. He described her as an obvious product of inbreeding. One of the things them New York newspapers like to make fun of is the fact that I call myself Major Lewis Redmond. Now let's talk about that. My daddy was a dirt poor farmer. He had this old country Irish burr, a gift for talking purty and not much of nothing else. Ah, laddie, he'd say when his crops had failed, there's a curse on me head for certain. 'Tis writ in the book of fate that nothing John Redmond puts his hand to shall prosper, save a wee gift for making poteen. That's what the Irish call corn whiskey. Ah, lad, it can cure heartbreak and misery, lighten your load and brighten your outlook. But like all things, laddie, moderation. Short and long of it is, people like my daddy after the Civil War, they lived a hard, scrabble life. At age 10, I was working on other people's farms, hoeing their corn, milking their cows, and working in their cotton. Well, when I heard about the big Galloway farm up in Transylvania County, I got out and I walked up there. And by age 12, I not only hoed corn, but I fetched firewood, slopped hogs, worked tobacco, and picked beans. One day I was working and I heard a wondrous sound, faint but clear. Well, I dropped my hoe and I gawked around. I guess I thought it was the angel Gabriel, maybe. Old Galloway said, "That's a bugle. They're a-playing lights out. There must be an army camp down at the far end of that cornfield." I kept a-gawking in that direction. Directly he said, "Go on, satisfy your curiosity." He said, "But now don't bother nobody and stay in the cornfield." Well, I took off and I run, you know, the way a healthy boy can run, right through that knee-high green corn. When I got there, that bugle was trailing and the lanterns was going out one by one, just like stars winking out in the sky. Pretty soon, all you could hear was men laughing and talking in the dark, and then that quit. All you could hear was the horses feeding, squeak of saddle leather. Well, the next morning, there I was, hunkered down that cornfield, and I took it all in. That bugle blowing, them getting their morning orders and marching around in that field. After breakfast, they'd sit around and talk and laugh and play cards and music. I took to going down there every day. Well, one morning I showed up down there and a wondrous thing happened. They seen me and they took me in, and I took to running errands for them. They give me a little rebel cap and a fancy sash to go around my waist, and an old rusty bayonet stick down through it. He had me stand at attention. "Private Redmond, you have served this company with distinction. I now bestow upon you the title of Major." Well, and they was all serious about it too. That's right, Major. That's where I got the name. "Major Redmond." "Yes, sir." "You're hereby ordered to retrieve my cigars from my tent post haste." "Yes, sir." "And on your way back, stop by Cook's tent and get yourself a cup of ginger tea." "Yes, sir." I loved it. I followed them soldiers around like a pup. When they marched around that field, I marched with them. After breakfast, we'd sit around and they'd write letters home and write me letters. And they taught me how to write and cipher. And I'll always be grateful for that. But more than that, I had this sense of well-being. You know, like I belonged there. Hell, I lived with them for an hour every day. One day I showed up down there and they was gone. Hell, I knowed they was leaving. It still was shock. I used to go down there and stand in attention at that field. "Major Redmond, reporting for duty, sir." One of the things folks around Asheville's always asking me is how I decided to become an outlaw. It was one July morning in 1870. It was the morning of the pack saddle. A pack saddle is a little worm, and it's got a dark girth around the middle. It looks like a saddle. It lives in corn tassels, and it's all covered with these tiny little hairs. And each one of them hairs is a stinger, kind of like a nettle. The pain from one of them little stingers is much like the sting of a yeller jacket. But now, we ain't talking about one sting. Let's say you're out hoeing corn. It's July corn and them tassels is way over your head. And as you break that hoe between them stalks of corn, you disturb a nest of pack saddles. And they fall down the back of your shirt. You damp old cotton shirt. And as they slide from your neck bone to your tailbone, they leave behind a string of whelks, everyone joining in to create a song of pain, much like a big church choir. First you take your shirt off, and waller around on the ground for a while, and then you sit in the shade while hopefully somebody helps pull them stingers out. Well, that's what happened to me on that July morning in 1870. And as I sat whimpering by the bank of the creek, my best friend Amos Ladd, he pulled them stingers out. And every time he did, he'd dab the place with a little cut of tobacco. And every time he did, he'd say, "Pack saddles. Just look at them, Lewis. Acres and acres of pack saddles. This year and next year and a year after that and a year after that." Well, I got up, picked up my hoe. Amos slung it out in the corn patch. He said, "Come on, Lewis, let's be outlaws. You and me, bad men, riding the roads by night from Deep Creek to Raven, from Nattahaler to Tuckasegee." Well, we walked out of that field. We rode by Shank's mare across the ridge and down into the holler at the head of Cane Creek. I found my daddy sitting on the porch asleep. Had a Bible in his lap. Mug what he called poteen sitting on the floor beside of him. Well, I woke him up. I said, "Daddy, it's Lewis. Me and Amos sure's wanting to go into business and we need your help." And I took that mug, got a big drain off of it, handed it to Amos, and he done the same thing and handed it to Daddy. You should have seen that old man's face when he realized what we was talking about. It was like sunshine spreading through a foggy cove. He took that mug, finished it off, and he said, "Well, lads, let's get to it." We built that still in this laurel hill next to a cold spring that boiled out from under this big rock. We got that first run finished and we smuggled it down to Walhalla and sold it to this feller that run a store. And he put it in clear quart jars and labeled it cod liver oil and put it on top shelf to sell. Hell, we hadn't no more than got out of town till they sent word that they needed more cod liver oil. Well, the word got out. In a matter of weeks, we had what was known as a collection system. We'd head out in a wagon loaded with produce, beans and taters and corn. But now, nestled in the middle of that produce was gallon and quart jars of cod liver oil. And Amos kept this little notebook, and it was all full of things like Jacob Barnes's corn crib or the Salt Lick and Willard Dietz's pasture. Long about here, I reckon we need to talk about why making liquor is illegal. It's because of the government tax. Now let's say I want to make a gallon of liquor and I want to sell it legal. Then I have to pay the government tax, $1.25 a gallon. Well, what do I charge? Let's say I want to make 50 cents. Well, that brings the total to $1.75 a gallon. $1.25 for the government and 50 cents for me. Now that don't seem fair, does it? I mean, what did the government contribute? They never raised the corn, they never shucked the corn, they never helped convert it into liquor, and they never tended the still. No, all they done was give me a stamp. Short and long of it is, making moonshine's illegal because it's competing with the government. So, me and Amos had a thriving business, but we knowed it couldn't last. We heard there's a bunch of federal agents had been sent out to scare the countryside between North Carolina and South Carolina line. And what a sorry bunch they was too. Them rascals actually got paid by the arrest. Let's say they arrest 12 men and take them in, and the court only finds 2 of them guilty. They still get paid for 12. They arrested my daddy in church on Sunday. Matter of fact, they arrested every man in church that Sunday. Most of them was turned loose, but not my daddy. He was old and sickly. He died in prison down in Greenville. A couple of weeks after that, me and Amos was making a delivery up in Brevard. Out from behind a tree steps Al Duckworth, Deputy Sheriff of Transylvania County. Al was a pretty good feller. I'd knowed him all my life. He said, "I'm sorry about this old house." He said, "Come on down. Let me search your wagon." He said, "Give me your pistol if you got one." Well, I never said so. I turned around and started climbing out of the wagon. Well, I looked up at Amos. He shook his head and just stared down into his coat pocket that hung open like a stove door. There in the bottom of it was one of the pistols, a little cheap gun called an owl's head. I was reached in, cocked it, turned and fired. Hit Al in the throat. I seen his collar button vanished. Blood just wailed out. He looked surprised, sat down in the road. And I started climbing back in the wagon and I heard something. And I turned around and he said he wanted some water. At least that's what I think he said. And I found a tin cup and I run up the road to the spring. When I poured that water in his mouth, it just run right out that hole in his throat. Amos drug me up in the wagon. We rode off. I just turned and looked at Al sitting there in the road. "Well, we're in for it now," Amos said. "There'll be 100 of them damned agents on the road by dark. What are we gonna do?" I said. He didn't say nothing for a long time. Then he said, "I reckon we'll go to dark corners." Dark corners. I'd heard about it all my life, but I don't think I really thought it existed. We left the wagon at Amos's, packed 2 horses, slick, fast runners that the Ladd family owned. Within an hour, we was riding down the crest of a ridge that led down into South Carolina. We rode through laurel hills and down creek beds. We rode through woods so thick that we lost sight of the sun. It's getting about dark and I heard the awfulest commotion you have ever heard in your life. And it kind of scared me and I said, "What in the hell is that?" "Guineas," Amos said. "I think we're there." "Where?" "Dark corners. Just listen. Them's the best damn watchdog you can have." And then we started seeing lanterns and campfires. You could hear people talk and laugh. Directly, this feller steps out and says, "Howdy, my name's Shally. Would you mind joining me down by the big fire?" I let Amos do the talking. He told them all about Al Duckworth, and then this feller stood up and said, "Mr. Ladd, I believe I know you." And it turns out that he was from Seneca, and him and Amos had been locked up a few years back. And then these 2 fellers asked me, said, "Didn't you have 2 brothers named Roger and Gilman that's in the Confederate Army?" And I allowed how that's so, up till they was killed in a skirmish outside Chattanooga. There must have been a dozen men there that I'd worked somewhere with in North Georgia or North Carolina. Them that wasn't wanted for moonshining had stole a horse or a hog or robbed a feed store. You know, the kind of things that desperate men do who have families to feed. Now, as near as I could tell, we was somewhere where the North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia lines meet. And over the years, it had become sort of a haven to outlaws, since nobody really claimed jurisdiction over there. I made friends there that would become my friends for life. Like Otis Horn. At age 12, the agents had killed his daddy down in Pickens. Him and his mom and his two sisters lived in this old barn up till he got a job of driving for a bootlegger. Hauled from Clayton to Atlanta, watermelons and shine, till he got caught. And Woodrow Mathis, he said after his daddy never come back from the war, his mama dropped dead in the fields, that he was sent to this church orphanage where he is farmed out to this old timer that never paid him but learned him his trade, how to make moonshine. I must have heard 100 stories like that. Hobie Ford, he'd been some kind of teacher at this college. He got burnt down during the Civil War. He said nearly every man in Dark Corners is a product of the Civil War. We're casualties, he said, as he plucked his mandolin. We not only lost the war, but we lost fathers and sons and brothers, and now most of us without livelihood or land. And I thought about that for a while. And then I said, like you said, old son, let's be outlaws. And I done a little recruiting. And when we rode out of there, 30 men rode with us. For long, we had a run of stills running from Buncombe down into Toxyway and into Coney. And a month after that, we had a run going from Swain County in North Carolina down into Rabun, Georgia. Even now, here in this jail, Nashville, I'm a little bit surprised at how well it worked. I've had a little time to think about it, and I know why. They got a fancy word here in this jail. It's a word you'll hear a lot during the trial, and that word is complicity. And that means we had help. And I don't just mean the fellers from Dark Corners neither. There's a many a time a local sheriff led a posse off in the opposite direction from one we took. Or say we'd be all wore out from running from a posse, and this old farm boy'd come out of the woods and motion for us to follow him, and they'd give us food and fresh horses. Hell, Amos said, we must be contributing to the well-being of half the people in North Georgia and South Carolina. But I'm afraid that the image we had outside Georgia and the Carolinas was quite different. To them northerners, we was lawless heathen that must be exterminated. I took staying at Amos's for a while, and I sort of took a shine to his sister. When it'd get too hot to stay there, we'd go up and camp at Toxaway or stay in this little cabin that we had that looked over the Tennessee River. The price on my head kept getting higher and higher, and them government agents got more and more dangerous. One time I was in that cabin, they kicked the door down and come in shooting. I had to shimmy up a chimney and went out across the roof and got away on foot. But I got hit 3 times. When I come a-limping up on the porch at Amos's about 3 days after that, he said, "Did you scorch your britches going up that chimney?" News traveled fast, I guess. And then him and Adeline dug 3 of them bullets out of my back. There was only one place that we could stay without sleeping with a cocked pistol or a horse saddled in the woods. Dark Corners. They knowed us now. And they'd be a welcoming committee come out long before the guineas sounded the alarm. "Hey, Lewis, hope you're needing a new driver," strangers would say. We was surviving now, more than surviving. Our mortgages got paid, our young'uns was fed and clothed, our fences was mended. Sometimes word would get to us that them agents was out on a wild goose chase, maybe in Seneca or Rabun. And times like that, we'd go to town, ride right in and walk down Main Street, Walhalla or Tryon. And one time, the governor of South Carolina invited us to dinner and we went. But them government agents are still trying to kill us. I reckon I figured sooner or later they'd luck up. The night that Amos got killed, we didn't think they was agent within 10 miles. I'd gone over to Toxaway to visit my sister. About a half a dozen of them slipped up on the porch, knocked on the door. When Amos opened it, they just shot him. When Adeline and her mama picked him up, they shot him again. Them son of a bitches, they claimed self-defense. They said that he snapped a pistol at them, it missed fire, and they had to kill him. Adeline told me that his pistol was in his pocket, and that's where they found it. I took it pretty hard, him dying like that. It's closer than brothers we was. A few weeks after that, me and the boys was down in Pickens, and we got ambushed. We managed to get away, but we lost a few horses. And it's while I was sitting up there resting in the woods above Pickens that I decided that we didn't have to run. And I told the boys that I figured it was time we went on the offensive. And we saddled up and we rode back into town, and on the way we run into that posse and we run their ice back to Pickens. And half of them spent the night in the county jail. Actually went in and asked to be locked up for their own protection. And I went to the house of one of them agents, and he wasn't home naturally. So I took his wife and we went to the bank, and I had her draw out the money and pay me for them horses. And then we come out, big crowd cheered us, and I sent word to them agents that we wasn't gonna be running no more. As a matter of fact, we'd be looking for them. And half of them resigned their jobs and left the country. Not long after that, I was sitting out with Adeline, and I asked her, how'd you like to get married? She said, oh, go on, be serious. I said, I am serious, especially since we done set up housekeeping and we got 2 young'uns. Well, I sent word to the paper in Charleston that the wedding of Adeline Ladd and Lewis Redmond would be held at the home of the groom, and the public was invited. And they come too. The local sheriff and the mayor attended the service and the reception, and the boys from Dark Corners was there too, mingling with the crowd. And they toasted us with a quality brew from the Ladd still, and we danced till dawn. But I reckon I knowed my days was numbered. The governor sent word to me that he had in legislation to get rid of them agents, but he doubted that it'd do me any good. He said I had become what was known as a symbol of resistance to federal law. The day I got caught, I made my usual attempts to escape. It's about 50 yards to the woods, and I never made it. I got hit 6 times. First reports said I'd been killed. The New York papers even printed it. Outlaw Lewis Redmond killed. But they doctored me up, stayed in the hospital a pretty good while, and then they locked me up down in Greenville. Word got out that some of my boys was gonna try to bust me out of there, so they transferred me up here to Asheville. Reckon there ain't no plans to bust me out of here. But a lot of folks has come by, old country folk, widder women. Hobie Ford come by, and said, we've got a new title for you. And I said, what's that mean, title? He said, you know, it's like calling you Major Redmond. Well, what is it? I said. He said, we call you the Prince of Dark Corners. And then he winked and disappeared. The Prince of Dark Corners. I like that. So, I'm not that perfumed, wavy-haired dandy in that story. The life I've actually led bears little resemblance to the one in that piece of trash. It's been something a good deal finer. Well, it's time to go, I guess. Hattie, it's been a while since we talked, so the world's took a turn or two. I like to come out here and be by myself for a spell every night. This time of year, I watch the lightning bugs rise out of the cornfield, smell that honeysuckle that rides on the night wind. Folks come to see me now. People what's been dead nearly 40 years. Amos lad comes. Usually it's a full moon night. He peers right out there under that old willow tree, all duded up like a riverboat gambler. And I always speak to him. Howdy, Amos, I say. He winks, nods, and says, Desperados, Lewis, you and me. And then he's gone with the fog and the lightning bugs. Al Duckworth comes by too, that hole in his throat, blood all over his shirt. I'm sorry, I says. God knows that's the truth. Out of all my sins, that's the one I regret the most. And I tell him, if I'd let you arrest me that morning, me and my family, Amos's family, and a dozen other young'uns would have went hungry. And he smiles and nods apologetically. And then he's gone too. But I know he'll be back tomorrow night, the night after that. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm over in Toxyway, or maybe at that little cabin up Swain County, looked over the Tennessee River. Sometimes I'm back in dark corners, watching the lanterns wink on the campfires of 100 fugitives. Oh, I'll wake up smelling wood smoke, tasting coffee from a campfire 20 years ago. I hear the horses' feet tamp where they're tied in the woods. Saddle leather creak. Well, I reckon I ought to bring you up to date. At that trial in Nashville, they tried to accuse me of 12 murders. but they couldn't produce their names. Hell, I guess not. They'd been created by them penny dreadfuls in New York newspapers. No, it seemed like in my entire career, I'd only killed one man, Al Duckworth, and they failed to charge me with that. No, my big crime was the manufacture and distribution of illicit liquors, bootlegging. Well, they give me 10 years in the Auburn Upstate Penitentiary in New York. I figured it's gonna be bad. It was dreadfully boring. Nothing to preoccupy my time, just eating and sleeping, staring at the doors. Things did change, finally. Wade Hampton, the governor of South Carolina, had written Chester A. Arthur a letter and asked that he give me a pardon. Zebulon B. Vance, the governor of North Carolina, done the same thing. Oh yeah, and there's this petition going around. Remember Minerva? Now this petition said that I'd seen the error of my ways, and I wish to live out the rest of my life being a good Christian and a teetotaler. I was also described as a helpless cripple in the later stages of consumption. Hell, it's for the longest time I had to remember to cough when we had company. Well, I was released on May the 18th, 1884. That was 20 years ago. I gathered my family together, my wife and young'uns, my sister over in Totsy Way. We all moved down to Walhalla, South Carolina. And after all we'd been through, we could finally be together without listening for a hoot owl's call in the night or a pistol to fire. What a wonderful thing it is to live unafraid. It took me a while though. I slept light for a few years. You know, before my body finally realized it was okay to relax. There's only one problem now. How was I gonna make a living? Like my neighbors, I'd have to scratch a living out of the unforgiving dirt of a Carolina farm. Or so I thought. It was about that time that Dietrich Beeman showed up. I was still in the bed that morning. Adeline come back there and told me there's a feller on the porch that's got government wrote all over him. He had a big old belly, 3-piece suit, smelled like pomade and tobacco. It looked like nobody owed money. Now, are you ready for this? He run a distillery, a federally owned and operated distillery. And he'd pay me a pretty good salary if I just managed his distillery. He'd pay me to make liquor. So I took the job. And for 15 years, I lived a good life as benefits the manager of a distillery. Now I asked you, is life not a strange thing? The last 20 years, I've lived a quiet life, peaceful, law-abiding citizen. Of course, being consumptive
I have to live a quiet life. There was this one night, though. This one night that made the good people around here wonder about me. There's a road out there that leads down into Seneca. One summer a few years back, these young blades hereabout, heedless young fellers like I once was, they like to gather out there at the crossroads. It kind of reminded me of when me and my boys used to cut up Mac the Fool and fire pistols. But one night, the mood changed. Hey, Redmond! It took me a minute to realize somebody was a-hollering at me. Hey, big bad outlaw, come out here and I'll kick your ass. I figured it's some young buck showing off for his friends. Every night for a week they'd come. Every night a little closer. Finally one night I could see them out there on the edge of the yard. There's about a dozen of them. This one feller out front with a pistol. Other ones egging him on naturally. Now Lindsay, that's what his friends called him. Lindsay'd started something he couldn't stop. Hell, I wasn't so sure he wanted to stop it. Adeline, she is worried, but she'd seen me in her yard before with guns. My young'uns, though, they is quiet, scared. Hell, they'd been raised up part of my life as quiet and peaceful. Had never heard no hollering and cussing, men in the yard with pistols. So I went out there. Oh, he is tickled to see me. I've told him out, boys, Lindsay said. He is moving like a feller does what's moving on false courage. You know, part strut, part dance step. What'll it be, Major? He said my name the way folks does what's making fun of it. 20 paces or quick draw. And then he looked kind of quiet and he said, where's your gun? And I told him I didn't wear a gun no more. Them days is over, I said. He said, oh no, Redmond. I know you got a gun back there in the house and you'd better go get it. Well, I told him I didn't want to fight him. He cussed, stomped around, and then he stuck his finger in my face. And he said, tomorrow night, Redmond, I'll be back. Well, he was as good as his word. There they was the next night. Crowd got a little bigger, moved a little closer. I sat here in the dark. I waited for him to start hollering. Come on out here, Redmond. We ain't a-going nowhere. I got up and I started moving quick. Where's your gun, he said. By then I was on him. I cut him from crotch to rib cage and back, just like I used to open up a sack of oats for the horses. My left hand held him by the shoulder while my right hand just opened him up. We could have been father and son standing there in the moonlight till he dropped his gun, looked down. There's something red and wet peeping out of his shirt. His eyes rolled back in his head. I stood back and let him fall. Me and Lindsay's friends stood there like that for a minute. I still had that knife in my hand. I was gonna see what they'd do. They muddled around for a minute or two and then they started off. I said, don't leave your friend. Two of them come back, carried Lindsay off, carried him face up so he wouldn't lose his stuffings. I'd appreciate it if you would leave me be, I said. Well, I figured the law'd be coming. I waited around 2 or 3 days for him. Finally, this feller showed up, said he worked at the jail. Said that there wouldn't be nobody coming after me because it had happened on my property, and a man has a right to protect his family. He also told me that Lindsay was expected to live, but he'd be a cripple most of his life. So I loaded up my buggy and I went down to Seneca, South Carolina. Went to the hospital. I found his room. God, poor Lindsay. His head is sticking out all them bandages. His fingers was plucking at the sheets. Nurse said he had 182 stitches. Evening, Lindsay. Evening, Lewis. I said, I just come to tell you that I aim to kill you. He said, I wished you had. I went back home and I thought about it. What I'd done to that boy. Would I do it again? I sure would. I learned how to cut a man like that in dark corners. This Spanish feller from New Orleans, he showed me. He called it the last resort. He said, if you're hard pressed, you ain't got a gun, use a knife. He said, you don't show off with a knife. You don't duel or wave it around. Your only advantage is surprise. You move in quick. You start right here, go up till the rib cage stops you, and back down. In all them years I rode, I never did cut a man, but I always carried that knife. I still do. Lately, I've been thinking about that Confederate camp. You know, the one that was on Galloway's farm? It was down at the end of a big cornfield. It's big you could get lost in it. And I've been dreaming about that cornfield. And I've been walking down them rows of corn, kind of like walking down the aisle of a church, except for the pack saddles. And when I get to the end, they're waiting for me. And not just the Confederate soldiers, but the boys is there too. Hobie Ford, Otis Horn, Woodrow, Shalley. Remember me telling you about that little ceremony they had? That's what's going on in the dream. Captain has me stand at attention. He says it again. Private Redmond, you have served this company with distinction. I now bestow upon you the title of Major. And then I wake up. There's a cornfield right out there, like the one on Galloway's farm. That's where I've been thinking they're waiting for me, the captain and the boys. Hell, I can smell the coffee.
time ago, I guess. Me and the boys riding again tonight. Why, if we're to leave right now, we could be at dark corners by daybreak.
A DVD of The Prince of Dark Corners, including a documentary on the real Lewis Redmond and other bonus features, is available from suckerpunchpictures.com.